Pop-O-Holics.
Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, the show about hot takes, hotter than pancakes, where we're a couple of divers diving deep into content. That's right, nothing special this week. I got nothing. Guys, I'm a little under the weather. If this is your first time listening to Pop-O-Holics, we take every month to theme around a subject, around an artist in our tour, some sort of subject. You know, we make up the rules, no rules, just right. Still waiting on that sponsorship. Outback Steakhouse. This month's theme is the View Askewniverse, the films of Kevin Smith in light of his Jay and Silent Bob reboot, which comes out later this year. This week's episode is going to be a double-decker again, packing them in. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and Dogma. But I wouldn't be doing this alone. No, who'd want to listen to this sick fool ramble on? I got my two best buds with me.
Chris Conkling.
And Brian Dupree.
Guys, so good to hear from you. Yeah, this is exciting. We're almost done with Kevin Smith stuff. We're on episode 51. We've crossed the threshold.
Exciting because we're almost done.
Exactly. I'm in and out of consciousness. I'm so sorry if I'm a little low energy this week. It's more than just the Kevin Smith-a-thon. It is. I'm physically ill. But we're going to talk about news this week, what we've been consuming, talk about our weekly poll, and then dive into Dogma and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Very exciting show for you. But let's start the way we always do with Brian's Wacky News Corner.
Welcome back, loyal listeners. So we've got some unfortunate news, which we kind of foreshadowed a couple weeks back. But MoviePass, the subscription service that admittedly, while it was going, when I was hip to it, it was great. Great while it lasted, $9.95 a month. They ran a special, nearly unlimited movies for a time at least, but they are finally closing shop, and according to Screen Rant at least, are officially shutting down. And they had announced, like I said, 3 weeks ago, they were taking a hiatus of sorts, and when we talked about this, we pretty much knew this was the death knell for MoviePass. It was only a matter of time, because they were just losing money at alarming rates. So I can't imagine investors were particularly happy with what was going on, and with things like A-List and the new Regal subscription service that are taking the place of this. It seemed like it was only a matter of time. So sorry, listeners, it's time to, I don't know if they're going to keep charging you, but I wouldn't take any chances. Go ahead and cancel your service just in case there's anything happening on the back end there. So MoviePass is unfortunately done.
Is it unfortunate, Brian? I say good riddance to this awful company.
I know a lot of people that took advantage of it. You, Chris, and friend of the show, Hector Cerna. There's a lot of people in our life that made good use of this. And Brian, I know you were a subscriber. This always seems so sketchy to me. Like the whole process was always, and the stuff this company pulled as far as setting rules out of nowhere, the way they were, started charging surcharges. They just weren't very clear about what they did. I mean, it was a shady business from top to bottom.
Yeah, I was an early adopter of MoviePass, and I don't know if I've mentioned this story on the show before, but in the very early days of the company, when I was using the membership, I went to a movie theater, and the woman behind the counter said I didn't have enough funds in my MoviePass card to purchase a ticket. And I was like, what are you talking about, funds on my card? I thought I was paying for a service to see unlimited movies. Like, I didn't realize that the monthly subscription that I was giving them was actually being placed on like some type of weird debit card of sorts. So when I reached out to customer service, they were very unclear with how they were fixing the issue, and finally got it resolved, and I was able to buy the movie tickets. But like you said, Christian, it just seems super sketchy, because why would I pay to have like I said, some type of pseudo debit card, money put aside for me to just go see movies, when I already have a debit card and could just go out and buy tickets. So that was the first instance in which I was like, I don't know if this company is being completely transparent with what they are offering and how this system is set up. So I ended up canceling very soon after that. I probably only used it for 2 years. But yeah, I'm not sad to see this company go. I think it's great that they kind of brought this idea to light. So official movie theater chains could take it and make it something of their own, a little more legitimate. But bye-bye.
Yeah, I think any company that tries to balance its budget like Social Security is probably doomed to fail. There's like, the math never made sense. It was like, you give us $10 and we'll buy your movie ticket. Because when you looked into it, you're like, they don't have a special deal. The theaters don't even really want them. They're just kind of paying for the movie ticket full price. And so it never made sense that you would pay this third-party company $10 a month and somehow you'd get $50 worth of value or more, right? That was always like, it's one of those
unsustainable
tech VC things that's like infinitely. You see this with like Uber and stuff, where it's like these companies never plan on being profitable. They're just trying to get VCs like bankrolled before the company inevitably stock is super inflated and the company crashes, and average people, when it goes public, get the short end of the stick.
Yep.
All right, that's my rant. Oh.
Yeah, no, I mean, who knows? Maybe a few years down the line, we'll see a huge story about how it's some giant scam to launder people's money or something. I don't know.
I'm telling you,
it worked for
surprised.
people for a time. You know, their app was never particularly good, and that was the main issues that I had. Similarly, Chris, it's like it was a debit system where you schedule the movie and then they'll debit the supposed amount on your card, but obviously it wasn't always the exact amount that you needed. So. Always had issues, but it did start, a service that I love now, which is A-List, and I'm sure the Regal one is up there as well in terms of quality. But it always seemed like something that was too good to be true.
What else you got for us there, Brian?
So, James Gunn has announced a giant cast list for Suicide Squad 2, which I know you guys probably aren't particularly excited about. I enjoyed Suicide Squad, but this is a giant cast list. I'm going to run through some of the names that I recognize at least, and he kind of jokingly said, don't get too attached. It's like a Game of Thrones thing. Like, some of these characters will die, folks. We got Taika Waititi. We've got Margot Robbie coming back. We've got Idris Elba, Viola Davis, Pete Davidson, Joel Kinnaman, John Cena out of nowhere. There's a lot of names that I admittedly can't pronounce. Sean Gunn, I imagine, is James Gunn's brother.
Yeah.
So if you go to Instagram or Twitter, I believe James Gunn posted this entire list, and a lot of it has not, you don't know exactly who's playing who yet. I'm sure that'll come out with time. But I'm excited about this movie. James Gunn, from what I've seen, has done a lot of good work, obviously, on the Guardians movies, and I'm excited to see what he's got to do with this property. At least, we know the music's going to be good, right?
We know that it's
definitely
not going to be any worse than Suicide Squad 1. I know you enjoyed it, Brian.
That would be difficult to do, admittedly.
That movie is not good. It's got a couple, in true Zack Snyder fashion, it's got a couple of golden like montages with like Seven Nation Army and some other like good pop rock tracks. There's some good montages, but that's about it. It's got a couple, and then it's got the most insane Joker performance by Jared Leto, which gets better and better with age, like a fine wine. That movie is very bad. It's a very bad movie.
Yeah, Brian, despite what you may think, I mean, I'm actually kind of excited for the Suicide Squad 2. Like, DC and Warner Brothers, they don't have a very strong track record over the last 5 years. Like you said, Christian, Suicide Squad is a terrible effing movie. But just the fact that it's like James Gunn directing, there are a lot of interesting people attached to the film. I would bet money that Taika Waititi dies within the first 5 minutes of him being introduced. Like, we're going to see a lot of those actors' heads blow up, probably. I'm excited to see that. I think that'll be fun. So let's
and
just
I guess it's
go
technically
along for the ride.
Suicide Squad, not Suicide Squad 2.
Brian, what else you got for us?
All right, so there's a couple new movies coming out this week. We've been talking about Brad Pitt a decent amount in the last couple of months with Tarantino, and he's in a new film called Ad Astra, which is essentially a space movie. The short description here says a man's journey across a lawless solar system to find his missing father, a renegade scientist who poses a threat to humanity. From the trailer, this looks like it's going to be a beautiful movie, potentially kind of action-packed. There's some like moon fight scenes going on. I don't know, moon pirates? It's hard to argue with moon pirates, right, folks? But this movie looks pretty interesting.
Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt is Moon Pirate. That's
Sign
the
me up.
sequel. But Brad Pitt's father was the scientist who was presumed dead. He went on this mission, supposedly to try and find some alien substance or some high tech. It's kind of unclear in the trailers that I've seen. But yeah, Brad Pitt, he's one of those actors that if he's in something, it's pretty easy sell for me. And this movie, space and Brad Pitt, it's hard to argue with this one. Have you guys seen the trailers for this?
Ad Astra is Latin for like with stars or something. If my old high school Latin is to be trusted, I believe.
That's kind of a terrible title now that you said it.
That might not be the direct thing, but Astra is astrology. It's like of the stars, and then ad is with. Or, could be wrong.
I have seen the trailer for it. It looks interesting. I definitely want to check it out at some point, whether that be in the theater or on VOD. I'm intrigued.
Space pirates. Chris.
Latin phrase. It's part of a Latin phrase that is more commonly per apsara ad astra, which means through hardships to the stars. So it means to the stars.
To the stars.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not okay. All right, that's a little better. Okay, so that's going to be in theaters Friday. So check that out if you're interested in some Brad Pitt falling from a space station to Earth and somehow surviving, which is one of the most memorable parts of the trailer that makes no sense. So
that now that you say that out loud, that seems more like a Tom Cruise move.
It does,
than a
but
Brad
he would
Pitt
have
move.
actually done it like the Red Bull guy.
Yeah,
if it was Tom Cruise. But yeah, so this one, it might be good. It's likely that it's bad as well. I'll hopefully see it and let you guys know in a couple weeks. Aside from that, we've got a new Netflix movie in conjunction with Funny or Die. And this is Between Two Ferns, the movie. So this was kind of a viral show online that Zach Galifianakis did, where it's kind of like a public radio, public access interview show where he just trolls his guests. And it's ridiculous and hilarious. I'm sure you guys have seen at least some of these, and I'm sure this is guaranteed to be a star-studded cast. I think he's making a trip across the United States. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to be set up or if this type of gag will work for a feature length, but I'm definitely going to check it out because Zach Galifianakis is consistently hilarious for me.
Is it going to be like a Borat-esque mockumentary type film?
I'm not entirely sure. I feel like it would make sense if they did it that way, but because he's so well known, it's hard to think you could get people who aren't in on the joke at this point, if they ever were. I don't know, Christian, what do you think about this?
Well, it's my boy Scott Aukerman. It's one of his babies.
That's right.
He's been the director of Between Two Ferns since it started, and he's worked with Funny or Die on a lot of different stuff. But this is kind of one of his this is actually one of his most successful projects that he's ever had. He's the host of Comedy Bang Bang, the movie and the now defunct TV show. So I'm always rooting for that guy. He comes from the old school, like Chicago style improv scene of like an LA, UCB theater of just going for a gag. And even if it's not funny at first, kind of playing it out. And that's always worked so well with Zach. So I think he's always best when he's paired with Zach. So I'm excited. I trust that it'll be a lot of like if you appreciated Live at the Purple Onion, like kind of the side sketches that happen there or Between Two Ferns. It's going to be a lot of the same. And if it's anything like those, it'll have probably one super huge laugh, and some of it might just be kind of that cringy, like, man, this is just so uncomfortable to watch, because that's kind of the humor that they both play into. But I'm excited. Did you guys ever see the Valentine special with that singer, is it Michael Bolton, the guy who also did stuff with like Lonely Island? He had like
that is Michael Bolton.
Yeah, Michael Bolton had a Valentine's Day special, and that was directed by Scott Aukerman as well, and that was insane. So we'll see. We'll see if it's more wacky. See how wacky it gets.
Is that's on Netflix as well? I feel like I vaguely remember this, but haven't seen it.
It's very silly. It's a very silly piece of programming, but I'm for silly.
So that'll be on Netflix this Friday as well. So check that out. TV shows. We've got a new season of American Horror Story premiering on FX this week. If I remember correctly, you guys have not watched as much of this as I have. I've seen, I believe, 4 or 5 seasons of American Horror Story, and definitely am going to watch it all at some point. Just haven't had the time lately. I'm a big fan of this series. I feel like every season has something to offer, even if they're not all as consistent or as good as some of them. But this one is American Horror Story 1984. From my understanding, it's going to be very much in the slasher realm, which fits with the 80s, and we talked about Halloween earlier, so definitely in that genre. Have you guys, I can't remember, have you guys watched any American Horror Story?
I have not. Christian, have you?
I have seen the one where it's in the asylum. It's probably called Asylum or something.
Asylum, that's one of my favorite seasons. That's season 2, I believe.
Yeah, and so I've seen that from top to bottom, and I've seen sparsely other episodes because my girlfriend has watched, I think, all of it. And from everyone that I've ever heard, I watched the best season, and I thought it was just pretty good. So I have no interest in seeing anything that's not hitting where that's at, because that was good. I enjoyed it, but nothing that blew me away, and nothing that anyone could convince me and say, like, that's the best one. Do you want to watch the other ones? I'd be like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. No,
That's
that makes
a tough
sense.
sell.
Ryan Murphy, I feel like he's become this huge force in television. Started off with Nip Tuck on FX, which kind of, from my understanding, was one of the first huge cable television shows, and just since then has done a lot of stuff with Fox after American Horror Story on FX. And he's just a real power player in an interesting way. He made an American Crime Story series, which the first season was really, really good, about the O.J. Simpson trial. It's a fictionalized version of that. The second one is the assassination of Versace, and I've heard that really good things about that as well. So he's doing a lot of really interesting stuff, and like I said, every season's got stuff where he's just kind of sprinkling in these aspects of folklore and American history, and it's really surprising how much he can throw in, even given its kind of ridiculous nature at times. But yeah, this is something I'm really looking forward to, and I got to catch up on the other seasons. But something that I really like about this show, similar to like a shared universe idea, they have actors who consistently play different characters in each season, but then sometimes you'll have one actor playing 2 characters in an individual season, and it shows how it is connecting the universes. In the last couple of seasons, things just like break down, and it feels like ridiculously revolutionary in some ways. But
that's fitting for the movies that we've been talking about recently.
It definitely is, right? So, yep, that's American Horror Story 1984, premiering on FX this week. So check that out.
Catch it. We're going to be moving on to what we've been consuming with our quick hits. Chris, you want to talk about your righteous gemstones?
Oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about them righteous gemstones. So this is a new HBO series created by Danny McBride, written by Danny McBride. If you're familiar with like Eastbound and Down or Vice Principals, like that dude does so much work for HBO. But it's a really funny show about this family that owns essentially a mega church. Like several mega churches around the United States, as well as internationally. So they all live on this compound together, and they're very, very religious, but they are all terrible, terrible people. It stars John Goodman, Danny McBride, Adam Devine, as well as many more. The show just got started, so only 4 episodes have been released. I'm about 3 episodes in, but it's very, very entertaining. All these people are very funny, and it's just one of those shows where it's enjoyable to watch these like self-proclaimed righteous people just prove that they are completely awful. It starts with one of the family members being blackmailed by this terrorist group. And in the first episode, he ends up finding a way to not have to pay them. And also, he thinks that he has killed them. They like run over a couple of them with their car. But it's very, very funny. Definitely recommend watching, especially if you like Danny McBride's other shows on HBO. You'll get a kick out of this one.
I haven't even heard of it, but it sounds right up my alley. Like
Oh, you
Eastbound
love
and
this
Down.
show, definitely.
From a clergy's perspective, that's great. Have you seen a lot of Danny McBride's other stuff? The Principal one and Eastbound and Down. Are you familiar with those?
I haven't seen any of Vice Principals, and I've only seen a couple episodes of Eastbound and Down. But from what I've seen of Eastbound and Down, that also was a very, very, very funny show. So if you're attuned, I think, to Danny McBride's sense of humor, The Righteous Gemstones is something that you'll dig as well.
And that's on HBO, correct?
Yes, sir.
Very cool. Brian, you've been listening to some Bon Iver.
I have. I've been meaning to talk about this album for a couple weeks, but other stuff has gotten in the way, movie watching. But finally, I'm going to dig into it a little bit. This is the fourth album by Bon Iver, which is largely Justin Vernon, although especially on these later projects has been a very collaborative process from what I understand. And he tours with the band. So there's a lot of people producing and help create this music. But this is the fourth project he's put out, and supposedly each one is supposed to be representative of a different season of the year, which I guess this would be, what are we in, fall, autumn? I can't remember what each of the other ones is, but this is called I. And his last two albums, so this is the kind of artist where I feel like if you listen to a few of their tracks and you're either into it or you're not. He's the kind of artist, he kind of reminds me of Tom York in some ways, in that it's very much voice as instrument, and the lyrics, when you can understand them, are great, but he doesn't go out of his way to make his lyrics particularly comprehensible. And for this album in particular, what I really loved, and only realized this week actually when I was trying to send the YouTube link to a friend, there are lyric videos which have choreographed music videos. Well, not all of them are full music videos, but lyric videos with art associated with them for every track on this album, which is streaming for free on YouTube. So
wow.
if you hear it and are interested in the sound and you want to know what he's saying, you can look it up here. Wikipedia describes this as folktronica and chamber folk, which is just nonsense to me, but I feel like it fits somehow.
Dude, genres are getting crazy.
And he's trying to push the boundaries of what he's doing here. Justin Vernon, surprisingly, you wouldn't necessarily think of it, but he's actually collaborated a lot with Kanye West on Yeezus in particular, even on the album before that, Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and stuff more recently with someone like Francis and the Lights, who they're both very close with. So this guy is a true collaborator. There was a hilarious story about Rick Ross. Rick Ross just came out with a biography. Sorry, this is a little bit tangential here, but he goes over to work with Kanye, and he sees this guy who he describes as just like some hippie, and they're just like smoking together, working in a closet. He's like, "Oh, this is probably one of Mike Dean's like stand-ins before he gets here," and like days later is told, "Yeah, that was Bon Iver, Justin Vernon." So it's just like Rick Ross just hanging out with Justin Vernon, didn't even realize who it was. But this album, in the last one in particular, he really started getting more into true experimentation. His vocals are mixed in crazy ways. They're in and out. There's synthesizers. There's tons of instrumentation. And it's the kind of thing where, similar to something like almost like a Flying Lotus, where it's not maybe stereotypically beautiful, but if you can put yourself in the mindset, the really beautiful moments stand out even more because of how seemingly the juxtaposition there between what's just kind of like noise and things happening, you don't know what you're listening to, but then it'll just flesh out some beautiful instrumentation, horns and guitars and piano, and a lot of really good stuff. And this album, I think, blends what he was doing in the last album with his earlier stuff. So it is much more folky, even though, folktronica says it all. It's folk music that is highly experimental still, but very beautiful. And I don't really know how to talk about this music, but if you're a Bon Iver fan, you should definitely check it out. And you can stream the YouTube lyric videos online, which are all really nice.
Yeah, Bon Iver is someone who makes me very jealous of kind of how creative he can be in the musical space. He's not a person. Bon Iver is not a person, but the collective that is Bon Iver. What's the main guy's name?
Justin Vernon.
And he has worked closely with Kanye, and it's very obvious because there's a lot of production chances that are taken. It's like you were explaining, it's not super traditional or straightforward. And sometimes you're just like, I don't even know what this is I'm listening to. But it's the kind of music that is for like huge audiophiles, and definitely the best pair of headphones that you have or a good sound system is highly recommended, because it just changes the game. It just shows you the layering and how all the puzzle pieces are fitting together so much better than if you were just playing it through like an iPhone speaker. So definitely one of those artists. I have to check out this completely. I was a fan of one of the tracks off the last project, the 33 God one. That's like one of his...
I think that was one of the singles, maybe.
One of the singles, and that song is just amazing. It's incredible. It's like a good piece of TV or a movie that you go back to and you find new things in it. You're like, I didn't even notice. There's like a baby yodeling in the background. It's that kind of thing. Or you're like, is that a washboard? Through like a delay pedal. You just don't have no idea. You're just trying to figure out how a lot of the sounds are made, and yet it's still cohesive. Like it's still a song, which I think is the trickiest part.
That's so funny that you say that, because I think I told you when I was texting you about it, Christian, but the singles came out for this and I listened to them and I was kind of like meh about them. Mm-hmm. And then I listened to them in the course of the album, and this album took me probably 4 listens before I'm like, wow, I love this album. Seeing everything as it flows together and being able to listen to these tracks within the context, it changed everything. And there's actually a really interesting, the New York Times, I'm not sure what the name of the segment is, but they have like an 8-minute video online that shows how one of the tracks took 5 years from when they originally started writing it, and talks to all the collaborators who were involved at different stages of the song. And that's really interesting and worth looking up as well, just to see kind of how like it started off with literally Justin Vernon just like turning a radio on and off or something, and they just start recording that, and then it becomes a song somehow over 5 years. It was really interesting to hear some of the process of how they're making music.
Yeah, it's like the step forward on, because the way music is recorded now by a lot of these artists, you look at like the pop ones that are coming, like Billie Eilish and stuff, and it's really talented people. But the way that you write songs now is totally different. It's the way that I grew up, honestly, in my songwriting, which is our synchronicity with computers, and I think the Bon Iver project has such a infallible way of blending technology and actual like experimentation and heart that makes it sound authentic, which is really hard to do. It's really easy to throw in a bunch of weird plugins and create a bunch of weird sounds with a bunch of expensive equipment, but to like bring it together and strike this balance of pop centric and experimental is hats off to them. Very impressive. Hats are off. I'm not wearing a hat, but if I was, it would be off. So technically I'm doing it right. Moving on, Brian, me and you both saw Bill Burr's Paper Tiger. Oh my goodness, long time coming with this. It's been probably a little over a year since his last special. Bill Burr is one of the best stand-up comedians in the business and is one of those on every year. And I look forward to every single one that he does. I would say his last special wasn't my favorite of his, but still some killer bits. And this, to me, just like he comes out shredding. I was really, really impressed with this one. And he's automatically talking about how, and he's actually recording it in the UK, and his first bit is about how, you can't say anything in the United States. But again, somehow he draws it within himself towards the end of talking about, how he never received enough love as a kid, and that's why he's always repressing stuff. And, he's very self-reflective. And I think that's all that you can ask of these comedians, is that they be open, honest, funny, and then also like, self-reflective of that stuff. So, and I would say that to me, this was in fifth gear the entire time, and I think was a much more solid set than Dave Chappelle's Less Outing, if I'm comparing two greats right up against each other in their most recent specials. This one, for me, was more funny, and it was less like taking shots just to take shots. I mean, there is a pretty unique perspective. He starts one bit off going, the funny thing about, sexual assault, so one of his bits does start with that premise, right? But I still don't think it's as contrarian somehow. Yet it's still very funny, still very brash. Brian, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this as well. And I think I watched his last special, and I haven't dug into him historically as much, but I think I definitely liked it more than his last one. And, similar with Dave Chappelle, it's the kind of thing where I won't always agree with the points that he's making, and I feel like he's kind of making them with like a wink wink and like a dash of salt. You know, he knows what he's saying is kind of like inflammatory in some ways, but it is funny the way he presents it, and you definitely see his logic. And that's what's important, right? It's like you see the logic of the joke, and then he turns it, and it's hilarious. So he's a true master, and something that I've really noticed with Bill Burr, and there's many great examples of this online as well. The way he deals with the crowd talking is impeccable. Like, he will just take it and run with it as if it was part of his bit, and it just shows that he's one of the greats, truly. You know, that he can, on his feet in this live setting, just go with it and riff for a couple minutes outside of the planned, you know, what seems unplanned, because that's the best comedy, but what is clearly unplanned, because you can't, unless he's just planning people in the audience, which I don't believe he does, and it doesn't come across that way, right? So it was funny because you said he recorded in the UK, and I just heard him on the Joe Rogan show recently. He was just on, I think the day of or the day before his special was going to come out. And he was talking about how he had a really good bit about something about the troops and about the military, and how he did this bit the first night because he recorded 2 shows, and it didn't play well at all. And he's like, what the hell? This joke was killing when I was touring before. And apparently there was a terrorist attack that had happened like just that morning or the day before in the UK. And he's like, why the hell did no one tell me about this? I would have addressed it and changed the bit, you know? Right. So that's something that got cut. But it's really interesting how stand-up comedy like toes this line of like, if you don't keep your finger on the pulse, you could say something that you just... that the crowd just turns against you. And obviously it played well the rest of the time. He got around it, but getting that kind of feedback from the artists themselves. And I listened to his podcast, which I think I said last week, and you kind of see him working on some of these bits, because he's just like talking to you. You know, he's saying things, saying what he feels, and I'm sure he goes back and references that kind of stuff. And you see how some of these bits form with just him rambling, as he would put it.
Yeah, I mean, he does what all great stand-up comedians do, which is it feels like he's just riffing off the top of his head, but he's clearly refined the bits. And I want to point out, too, something they talked about in that Joe Rogan interview, is that the direction of the stand-up special, they want it to be more classic, and there is a lot of long takes of him, and I think that helps set. There's not a lot of fast cuts to everything. It feels like you're at one of the shows, and it's just super funny. And again, he's doing something a lot riskier, which is like he starts out, and I think the first 30 minutes is on kind of the Me Too movement, and he's towing just this really fine line of like, you know, being respectful of people that suffer. And I think partly what he does, and you know, one of the major bits is talks about how horrible all the first allegations were that came out and how disgusting they were. And you're just like, I can't believe people did this. And, you know, the joke is that like, and now we're in this place where women are coming out and they're like, and then he didn't call me back and I think I was raped. And he's able to like get to this point of like saying shit that, you know, sometimes your brain goes to and you're like, well, that's definitely not acceptable to say in many ways. But because he's a comedian, he's got this freedom and this liberty. But it's a fine, you know, I take it as like, it's really easy to mess that up and just come across as an asshole. And I think he's still able to toe that line. And to your point about him keeping the pulse on thing, another thing he mentioned in the interview was that, you know, he still hangs around the comedy clubs with the young comics, and that's something that keeps him up to date and keeps him young, and I think keeps it from being him a get off my lawn old man and coming across really disconnected. I mean, he sounds connected to these things, and it feels like he's well educated on what he's talking about. But yeah, that's Bill. Anything else, Chris? You gonna check this out?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I didn't have time to watch it this week because I had family in town, but I definitely want to watch this.
Yeah, be interested to hear what you think. So that's Paper Tigers now streaming on Netflix. We're going to move right on into our weekly poll.
Please don't leave your thoughts on hold. Come on down to a weekly poll. Please don't leave your thoughts at home. Come on down to a weekly poll.
Gentlemen, this week we learned a lesson on the subjectivity of art, because for the first time in a long time, our poll is literally 50-50. Last week, listeners, as you know, we dove into Mallrats and Chasing Amy to celebrate our View Askewniverse month, and you guys are divided right down the line as far as which film is better. 50% of you like Mallrats more, and 50% of you like Chasing Amy more. How do you guys feel about these results?
So they've proven me wrong somehow. Because last week I said Kevin Smith can't lose against himself, but he also can't win against himself.
Apparently.
So this is mind-blowing to me, and I'm hoping if this continues, it'll just be incredible and a Pop-O-Holics staple, that we'll have to come back to. But this was really surprising to me. But I think I understand it. It's like Mallrats is clearly one sort of Kevin Smith movie, whereas Chasing Amy seems to be more of an outlier in terms of his what he's made historically and what he's made, totally. So I heard him talking about Chasing Amy on his podcast last week or the week before, and he was really talking about how much he changed by making this movie and how he grew up and grew out of some of his insecurities and things. And I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like with the double episode, we couldn't really talk about that movie as much as we could always talk about these movies for multiple hours more. But yeah, you should check that out, his Fat Man Beyond podcast. He kind of... someone asked a question in the audience, and he talks about how much, he was just, an insecure kid before he met his wife who had previously been engaged, and how at a different point in his life that would have been a showstopper for him in terms of starting a relationship with her and inevitably getting married. So it was just such a huge point in his life, and it shows in, how grown up that movie feels compared to some of what he did before. But I was surprised by this one.
How do you pick your favorite turd? It's a hard thing to do. No, I'm not gonna
Dude.
I'm kidding. Chasing Amy is, as we'll come to find out, spoilers for my list, is probably gonna hit that top spot on my favorite out of these films that we've seen. I think that I like Kevin Smith in his later years just so much more, and we'll get into more of that. But that being said, this shocks me. But I think Brian, he hit the nail right on the head. I think it's two different things that Kevin Smith is known for. One of which ages more and more poorly every day and is not cohesive, and I can't believe people gave this guy money to make a movie. And one is a genuine piece of someone trying to make something meaningful and has a lot of really high highs and some really great scenes, and is ultimately a flawed film, but definitely a much better film than Mallrats. But I can see that if you're into Kevin Smith, you would be into Mallrats if you like his first half of his filmography. So although it disappoints me in humanity, that I would say that it's very possible too, and I've made this argument for other polls before, I would say that it's possible that half of the people that voted for Mallrats have never seen Chasing Amy and have also not seen Mallrats recently. I'm just going to throw out a guess there.
That is very likely. Also, are you commenting on the taste of our listeners, Christian?
Listen, I think our listenership has great taste. Our listening numbers have never been worse than this month. So clearly they're as uninterested in Kevin Smith as I am. I'm sorry,
Godzilla
Chris.
had better numbers than Kevin Smith.
I would say that we need to do a part 2 Godzilla, go through some more, because Godzilla was a great month. Listeners, I appreciate your taste and your input. I don't know everything. I'm just a sad man who has never made a film, who's only talking out of jealousy over this. So, but I think this month has been a lot of fun. Chris, I don't want you to. I'm not attacking you directly. I'm attacking our listeners. All right, I'm gonna stop talking.
Always a good move.
attack both my co-host and our listenership.
I do not feel attacked, so all is well.
Good.
We'll get there.
No, but I to close off on the yeah, that's coming. To close off on the thing, I'm very shocked. I'd like to see a broader sample size. So, listeners, tell people about the show. Say that, hey, even if you're not into the content, the boys make it lively and fun. And you can join the conversation on our Facebook by searching for Pop-O-Holics. You can give us feedback on what you'd like to hear from us or what you're enjoying and not enjoying at popaholicscast@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Guys, we are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to be talking about 2 more Kevin Smith movies, Dogma and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, when we get back on Pop-O-Holics.
That's why I had to come down here this morning, man. That's why I had to miss my cartoons. You call me, you tell me it's important.
We're going home.
Take it, man, and quit leering at me. People are gonna think I just broke up with you.
2 fallen angels have just discovered a loophole that can get them back into heaven.
Outstanding work!
All they have to do is get to Red Bank, New Jersey. There's only one problem.
What
stop a couple of angels from entering and thus negating all existence. I hate it when people need it spelled out for them.
Now,
I'm to charge you with a...
That is from the trailer of Dogma, featuring the same music from the Matrix trailer. It is written and directed by Kevin Smith. Budget of $10 million. It grossed $31.4 million. And it stars Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Linda Florentino, Salma Hayek, Jason Lee, Jason Mewes, Alan Rickman, Chris Rock, Kevin Smith, George Carlin, Bud Cord, Alanis Morissette, and Barrett Hackney. Oh my goodness. So this is a star-studded cast. This is coming off of Chasing Amy. And this is a slightly more big budget film. I believe this film has like 100 times the amount of money. You know, it's up there with a budget of $10 million, and it's used pretty good. So we're gonna dive into the first viewing and our most recent viewing of Dogma, and then we're gonna talk kind of about the religious aspect. Then we'll dive into Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and compare it to his other films, and then compare the two together. Guys, let's start off first with your first and most recent viewing. Chris, our resident Kevin Smith-aholic. We're going to start with you. Give us your thoughts on Dogma.
Like the rest of my first viewings of Kevin Smith's films, I first saw Dogma in high school. And in high school, the things that resonated with me, you know, like I mentioned, like the whole slacker mentality really resonated with me, and Clerks and Mallrats, and having not come from a super religious background, definitely nothing like yours, Christian. I mean, I was familiar, but not as familiar. I didn't appreciate what Kevin Smith was doing in this film until much, much later. So, upon my most recent viewing, I really took to heart kind of the overall message of this film. He still has some like Kevin Smith antics in this movie, especially when it comes to Jay and Silent Bob. You're always going to have those type of like wacky Looney Tunes-esque jokes with those two characters. But overall, I think this is one of Kevin Smith's more heartfelt films and stronger works, and I think the message that he's trying to get across is a very positive one. Brian?
Yeah, so in the months leading up to this month, which we had planned for a little while, I'd started keeping an eye out at my local sound exchange to start acquiring these movies. And this is actually my first time seeing Dogma. So I've watched it twice now, but they've both been in the last about month and a half. So I rewatched it just a couple nights ago for this recording. But this was essentially my first time seeing this. And without getting into saying my overall favorites, this is definitely up there for me in terms of Kevin Smith movies. I think, like you said, it's a very positive movie. We'll get into a lot of the reaction and if it was justifiable or not. But it was very surprising to me because I only knew about this movie. It was the kind of thing where I'd seen snippets of it on Comedy Central growing up, and I always felt like it came in at the same point, and it wasn't a point where I was interested in it. I think it was always towards the end of the movie.
Was it the point where Chris Rock was falling from the sky? Because I swear I've seen that scene and that interaction 100 times.
Same.
I don't think it was that one. I feel like it was the cut off wings, or what I remember, how the cut off wings looked. So I feel like I always came around in the very end of this movie and never got to see it live from the beginning, and I'm sure it was fairly heavily edited when it was on TV anyway. But yeah, this was something that I always knew was contentious. It was presented as ridiculously blasphemous, and we'll definitely get into that. But with all that being said, I was surprised at how theological this movie was in interesting ways, you know? And yeah, it's really funny, especially if you know, I was raised Catholic myself, and this movie is definitely by a former Catholic. I'm not sure how much he practices or believes anymore.
He's still practicing.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So it's someone who's clearly given a lot of thought to the problems with organized religion and Catholicism specifically, but still, you know, I was surprised at how much this movie shows that these things are kind of real, or it's like making an argument that there's a reality to this even if humans aren't doing it right. so to speak. And yeah, that's what really stood out to me the most. And the Ben Affleck and Matt Damon in this I think they have really good chemistry, and just the roles that they play, and these Angels on Earth. Good Omens just came out recently. It's one of my favorite books as well. And just these sorts of characters who have been around for millennia and have their perspectives on humanity. It just always cracks me up, just those types of characters. I'm just rambling at this point, but yeah, so this is my first time watching it, and I was very pleasantly surprised with how I don't know if it's tactfully done, but how well it touches these topics and gives you stuff to think about from a theological standpoint.
So, Brian, like you, I had seen bits and pieces. I came in around that Chris Rock bit, and I've seen that part, and I've seen kind of the tail end of it several times, but I'd never seen it start to finish, because this movie is kind of hard to find. It's not currently available for purchase on the iTunes store.
Yeah.
And I know after that edited run through Comedy Central for about 7 years or whatever their contract was, I just haven't seen it pop up anywhere. It's not part of any like online bundles and stuff. So, and no one has like the streaming rights to it, from what I was able to see, at least not currently. So this is a film that I'm very unfamiliar with, and it's slated to be one of my favorite Kevin Smith movies. It has everything that I would want. Like, I think he's starting to get really good actors. This is the first movie where I really think Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were shooting Good Will Hunting at the same time, and you can just tell those dudes are movie stars. You get George Carlin in there, you get Chris Rock, you get freaking Alan Rickman in it. And
Amazing.
so he's starting to get some like good tools and good assets. So this was primed. I had some expectations of this, and it's around religion and theology and Catholicism, which is right up my alley. And this movie is just kind of a bummer and kind of disappointing. And there's highlights to it for me that are, watching it at this stage in my life that are definitely good, and there's good aspects. And I think I was genuinely laughing at a lot of different stuff. There's a couple of theological bits that I was like, "Ooh, Kevin Smith, that's really clever." But I think overall the theology isn't super strong in creating its own universe. And this is where I start to see the whole Kevin Smith view of Askewverse actually kind of inhibit his ability to make a fully fleshed out movie like this because of Jay and Silent Bob's, in my opinion, unnecessary contribution into this whole thing. Like, I think this movie would be a lot stronger without them. I don't think the lead, I don't think Linda Florentino is a bad actress. I just don't think she's very good in this movie. Just the kind of the way it's shot, and I'm wondering how much of this is me being upset because we just watched a Tarantino marathon, who is an actor's director. And I would say Kevin Smith is a Kevin Smith director. I don't think he knows how to serve the actors or bring out the best performances.
He's definitely a stickler for the script. Tarantino, like you said, is more of an actor's director, and he wants to get the best performance out of those people. And that's not to say that Kevin Smith doesn't want to get the best performance out of his actors, but he also doesn't really let them improv at all.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this is just speculation that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were able to assert more of the characters into it more than maybe and were able to deal with Kevin Smith as a director a little more than Miss Florentino. Because again, I there's nothing that indicates that she's a bad actress. It's like, really, you pick this take, and it's like that stuff shouldn't rip me out of a movie. We should be way past that when you're on your fifth film, whatever this is for him. And there's just a lot of that, and the editing's just kind of weird. And I think it just altogether, there's some stuff that really works on a number of different levels. And I love a lot of the performances in this movie, which is uncommon for these first early Kevin Smith movies. But I think watching it more than now, it's not what I would want from the type of subject matter. And I do believe there's a lot of room for comedy, farce, and seriousness, and even mixing those. But I think tonally, this movie's a little kind of all over the place. But yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts. I wanted to go in and talk a little bit about the religious theological elements as we get into our talking about kind of the backlash it received. What stuck out to you guys kind of about the way they handled religion and Catholicism in this and managed the universe building?
So I just want to touch on something you said about how hard this movie was to find. So before I ended up getting it from Sound Exchange, I looked on Amazon, and this was on, July 13th. there was the Prime DVD was $67.98 for the special edition, and the Blu-ray was $129.99.
It's because the movie's out of print.
So that is just insane to me that no one, because obviously there's a demand for it if people are willing to pay those kind of prices. But it was mind blowing to me that this, what I consider to be a fairly popular director, but I guess he's not as mainstream as I think.
Well, I haven't gone too far down the rabbit hole for research as to why that's taking place, but I believe it comes down to ownership rights of the film. I don't know if Kevin Smith has full ownership rights over the movie, therefore he cannot publish the film.
Was it this or Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back or both that was actually put up by Dimension?
I know Jay and Silent Bob was. Okay. I don't believe this was.
This one was Miramax again, I imagine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was just really interesting to me. So as far as the theological stuff, Alan Rickman playing Metatron, I feel like most religious people that I've talked to probably have never heard the words or the character of Metatron as the voice of God. This is like a really deep theological cut from my understanding. Did you guys know about this character before watching this movie?
If I'm not mistaken, all of these external characters are from the Apocrypha. Is that not correct? Like the extended Catholic scriptures. These aren't from the 66 original books. These extra, Bartleby and Metatron and all that. This is from extended sources that aren't part of the traditional like King James Bible.
I feel like Metatron may even be from Judaism. I'm not sure where the name exactly comes from or if it's in the Apocrypha, but this is something that I think is more so of a separation between God speaking and God itself kind of thing. And they kind of dig into, how humans can't hear the true voice of God, which is really awesome to me because I feel like
Kabbalist
okay,
text.
Yeah, so that's mystical Judaism. Sure. So the people who are diving deepest into the Torah, I would argue, considering they are actively translating and arguing about translations, which is some of the more interesting theological stuff from my perspective. But just the idea of the voice of God, the true voice of God, being incomprehensible or even physically damaging to humans. This is something that's also in Hinduism to some degree. In the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about how God's true form revealed to some people would literally, they could not physically handle it. And I'm doing a disservice in my presentation here, but I just really appreciated these deep cuts, which I'm not even sure if the Catholics would use that kind of language. So it shows that Kevin Smith is, he's really interested in the theology, even if he's skeptical of some of it. I really appreciated that. Something
and that's
like
not to cut in too hard, but and that's something that the movie is dancing around the whole time, which is, and I think it's actually a very beautiful, thoughtful, mature sentiment, which is belief is dangerous, ideas are good, right?
Right.
And aligning religion with that. So I completely actually align with kind of the point he's trying to get across. And I think by bringing in these other aspects of the Christian Bible, which may be more deep into the original 5 Torah, or some other extended stuff from Revelations or the Apocrypha. I think it's broadening the definition and saying that it's playing into the idea that Catholicism doesn't have it 100% right, and it's just these denominations are separating more than they are bringing people together.
I'm going to go ahead and say, even in the Apocrypha, I don't think they talk about shit demons, but I may be wrong because I haven't read it all. Excremental is one of the funniest things I've heard, though. I can't deny that. So just kind of a weird deep cut thing from the movie's corporate scene, which we should talk about at some point when, Matt Damon's character is Loki is bringing divine justice in his eyes to these characters on the wall. So just Mubi the golden calf and how Kevin Smith has built up this, literal golden calf straight from the Torah, this idol. On the wall, there's a poster of one of their cartoons or something, and it's named Enoch, which is also a kind of deep cut biblical character. multiple characters from the Bible, actually, as well as some like 16th century occult stuff, Enochian, the angel language from John Dee, which I think I talked about at some point on one of our maybe Castlevania episode, probably it came up. But I appreciate those little touches. Like, it almost feels like a Tarantino touch, where it's like, okay, Kevin Smith wanted to drop these little things in, but it didn't want to make it a plot point necessarily. So yeah, things like that. I'm gonna let you guys jump in here. I'm just going on.
Well, I think that one thing that bothered me, and maybe this is like, if I often think that like old religious texts often can be aligned with like modern day superheroes. This is an original thought, it's mythology that humans create to understand characters and archetypes and so on and so forth. So I'm gonna have my soapbox Bible nerd come out of me right now, which is that angels, and they mention this, so they kind of talk about it, but it really messes up the thoughts. Angels, the difference between angels and humans is that when God created angels, he didn't give them free will. And the movie does a pretty bad job of describing that, because they often do whatever they want. Matt Damon is somehow not able to kill he's only able to kill the unrighteous, right? So that's kind of a rule that he has. But I feel like the movie could have gone a lot further with exploring that premise, because it seems like the angels are kind of doing whatever they want. There's little things, but I just don't think it goes far enough. And they bring it up, so at least they address it, that the difference between them. But it seems like Ben Affleck makes a very important choice, which he would otherwise not be able to do.
Right, and we at least do get how Affleck's character, is it Azrael? Is
Bartleby.
Bartleby. Sorry, that's Jason Lee's character, Azrael. So Bartleby is kind of like the guy who's constantly poking Loki into doing things. He was the reason they got drunk together, and he's the reason he stepped away originally, why they got sent to Earth. And similarly this time is the one who's kind of like, although he's not the one who initially comes up with the plan, he still, loses his mind essentially, and is the one who decides to take it to this extreme. Something I did appreciate about angels is that I think they mentioned 2, the seraphim and one other class of angels. But this is something that I only discovered recently, is that there are, I think, 9 different classes of angels in the Catholic sense, at least, at varying degrees of, I don't know if it's like closeness to God necessarily, but at least there's a power structure and like a hierarchy of power.
Like purpose. You have like archangels, which are like the wrath of God. And then you have messenger angels like Gabriel, and that's what angel means. Angel just means messenger of God.
Okay, right. So it's just something that is probably, like you were saying, it's something that doesn't come from the text, but it's stuff that's been built up in the theology from the people historically who have studied this stuff and studied the Bible itself. So,
and Catholicism adds a lot of, and again, this is kind of the stuff that I'd be looking for, which is that there's original text, and then Catholicism is a lot of like ritualism, and it's a combining of like Roman gods and rituals with biblical Judeo and then the reformers of the Church of Jesus Christ. And it's kind of like this hodgepodge, and then Catholicism has mystified saints and has added layers of kind of their own extended universe, if you will, for doing things. They're extra canon, and we've seen this break out in a lot of different denominations. And I think the movie again is skirting these things, and it's a tall order. I mean, I've always wanted to do something like this, which is part of what upsets me is like my own selfish, like, I mean, if I wanted to do something like this, I'd be tackling it from this angle, and I would just say Kevin Smith isn't doing that. But you're right. I mean, you're pointing out a lot of stuff that is really detailed, and he's just taking it in a totally different direction. But that is something that bothers me, is this universe that he's created of like what the true angels are, because it's people talking directly, isn't super well fleshed out with what the reality of it is. Kind of, I mean, it's a whole lot of them telling them, but it seems to be pulled from everywhere.
But again, to point out, what you said earlier, and I 100% agree with, is that the main point of the film is that humans have kind of like gotten it wrong, So whenever we're talking about, old texts or the original texts, those technically within like the mythology, and I hope we're not upsetting too many people by referring to it as such, but like technically within the mythology, those texts would have been translated by man. So like anything we've ever heard of the objective reality of what this universe is somewhat subjective because it has always been translated by man.
Sure.
So the rules that we're referring to right now could potentially be fallible within what Kevin Smith is saying in the film, because we have no other frame of reference outside of the context that has been translated to us by humans.
Right, and I would say
Does that make sense?
And I would say that this movie does a poor job of establishing the actual rules of everybody's purpose and like what they can do going in between our realm and the next and being in human form and all that stuff. I think the movie just does a bad job of setting up its own rules.
That
So
may
what you're
not have
saying-
been Kevin Smith's mission, though.
I was gonna say, so you're not gonna follow Kevin Smith's cult based on Dogma?
No, but I think an effective, in a sense, and again, treading very lightly, obviously this is a conversation about people's, beliefs and stuff they hold true to. And I'm not trying to be dogmatic about my Southern Baptist, religion that I studied and studying Judaism and stuff. Like, I'm not saying that, because of what I studied, it's wrong. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. What I'm saying is that even the rules he establishes for what the capital T truth is and
Inconsistent.
is inconsistent at best.
No, that's totally fair. And just to your point about angels, it's like all the angels that we've seen are on Earth in at least physical human forms. So I don't know. It seems like
But
this
have
is like
wings and they can't get shot by bullets, but their wings can. Again, like even like if it's a comic.
Okay, I mean that's fair. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Like the movie just doesn't set up rules and follow them very well, which is important in any like thing where there's supernatural elements. I think if you're breaking your own rules and not setting clear definitions, it's hard to like be invested in what the characters are going through.
One thing that we did learn is that angels read comic books because Bartleby makes a Hulk joke. He's like,
does.
"Don't make me angry. You won't like me when I'm angry." And I was just like, "This is so silly," but it's great.
Hey, man, he's been trapped in Wisconsin for how long? Hundreds of years? Thousands of years?
Plenty of reading time. Yeah.
Before Wisconsin existed.
And Matt Damon is able to shoot somebody on a bus because they're making out with someone that's not their wife. And then angels can't drink, but he drinks, which makes him not an angel anymore. So he was able to make the decision to, isn't that what, or he got his wings shot off and then he was able to drink, I guess. Okay.
Well, no. So he did. So the thing was, God made the rule that they were not allowed to drink, and because they were planning on going through and having their slate wiped clean, I think at that point they figured they could, essentially sin, because it was all going to be wiped clean anyway. That's how I understood it, at least.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Brian.
So before we get off, I don't know if we're going to move on to the next point. Before we get off the theological thing, something I noticed this time around was Bethany, who I feel like is kind of a Christ-like character in this. And obviously and I feel like this is probably one of the most contentious parts. It's like essentially the Da Vinci Code. In terms of Bethany being a long-lost family member of the bloodline of Christ, which in itself is a very contentious thing, that Christ had siblings. Maybe not that he had siblings so much.
It's more like half siblings.
Right, exactly. Yeah, true. God is their stepdad, I guess. But
No,
so
God wouldn't be their. Joseph would be their.
No. Joseph would be their biological fathers. Joseph
Right.
is Jesus'
Right.
stepdad.
Joseph would be Jesus' stepdad. So God would have no relation outside of like the spiritual relationship
Okay,
that
true.
he would
Guys,
hold with those
guys,
other children.
We're all
But
God's children. So
that's the point I'm trying to make here, lightly, Christian.
So Bethany, though, in the context of this story, she kind of is the self-sacrificial character, and it makes sense because she's presented as being from the bloodline of Christ.
Yeah.
And she gets stabbed in the side, which I felt like, I don't know if you guys noticed this. This is like in the story of Christ when he's on the crucifix, he gets stabbed in the side as he's hanging there. And the first time through, I didn't recognize it, but maybe it was centered. I felt like it was off center. I don't know. I may be reaching here, but because of her sacrifice, I thought that maybe Smith was kind of trying to draw some parallels there.
Wait, she gets stabbed in the side?
yeah,
Well,
when she pulls the plug on the person that got. And I missed
the
how
body
this
that God
happened.
is inhabiting. Yeah.
God is like possessing somebody is like trapped inside a human body.
Possessing somebody on purpose, not on accident.
Oh,
Like
you see,
he-
I actually missed completely why he was there. And
So God has a skee ball habit. So every month he'll take a sabbatical, inhabit and possess the body of a mortal, and go down to the Jersey Shore to play skee ball. And the point of this is Azrael knows that this takes place. So at the very beginning of the movie, he sends his demons to basically put God in a coma, ensuring that she will not be able to leave this human form. Thus, his plan with Bartleby and Loki will be able to unfold without any problems from God.
okay, I missed that. I did watch this movie over 3 different viewings. Not to the film. I don't want to blame it on the film. I watched it when I was very tired, and I made it like 30 minutes in. So maybe I was disconnecting,
no
because it's the opening scene. when, like,
It's the very
hockey gets-
opening
yeah,
scene
okay,
where
okay.
they, injure him.
That makes sense. That's very funny. Yeah, and that's why I was like genuinely confused when she's like, "Did he play skee ball?" Like trying to go to the hospital and find somebody. I was like, I know this makes sense to something. I've missed something very crucial.
Yeah. So I didn't realize that she got stabbed. Every viewing that I've had, I just assumed it was the
Force.
expulsion of God that destroys her insides. I didn't realize she got stabbed by something in the hospital.
Well, see, I didn't see exactly how it is, but it is like an open wound on like
Yes.
the side of her stomach, and
Yeah.
then she's like, resurrected essentially.
Chris, I don't
presumed
blame you
dead
for-
and then brought back.
I don't blame you for not noticing that, because Kevin Smith has never shot a good action scene in his life. And so
Oh.
anything involving movement
Shots
is
fired.
always very confusing. It doesn't look bad for a $10 million budget, but I also was confused at what made her start bleeding. But yes, I drew the Christ parallel. And she gets resurrected, and then has the next son of God.
And she gets her little nose booped.
Oh my God, it's so funny. And the fact that God is Alanis Morissette is like, it's very, like, that part of it's hilarious. And how essentially plays God out as this like super powerful child, which is,
I think makes sense.
I
Hot takes.
it's definitely a perspective. And a perspective a lot of people, have had about, with, the answer to why anything happens would just be like, oh, because. Because if you had a child like mine, wouldn't you do this?
Yeah.
But so that leads us into what do we think the most offensive thing in this is as far as like Christianity. I would argue, if to give my 2 cents, is that I don't think it is an important enough film to like really make that big of a difference. And as with anything, this movie made a good amount of money for how low budget it is, partially probably because every time the Catholics hate something, they just like give them free promotion for it.
Yeah, they're
And it's so
bolstering
true.
the marketing.
So I think the movie is so silly and doesn't try to take itself too seriously, and I don't think outwardly hate on people who believe stuff. And I think the most important thing it gets right in the seriousness is that the characters are talking about their faith, and our main character is always discussing when she lost her faith and how she wants to have it again and how she's dealing with everything happening. So I think the core of it, I think, is a very hopeful, thoughtful message. I think the way that it depicts I think it attacks, clearly it's just attacking the dogmatic elements of religion.
Right.
Hence the name Dogma. Super deep Kevin Smith. But I think effectively is doing that. And so I would say that if you do get offended, I would tell people to reevaluate, their faith and what's important to them. Does this movie really matter that much and hurt their faith? Why would it hurt their faith? But what do you guys think? Do you guys think it deserved kind of the criticism that I got?
No, I completely agree with you. A lot of the backlash that it received was actually prior to the film even being released. So, the Catholic Church basically found out that Kevin Smith was making this movie called Dogma, and it had theological and religious elements in it, and automatically that kind of like set up a red flag for them, and they started protesting against it. But I would argue that this film, like you said, Christian, is actually a very pro-faith movie. He definitely pokes a lot at organized religion, which I can't fault him for, and I kind of agree with him in that sense. And he talks about how, faith should be more about an idea and less about a belief, because people get very offensive when you criticize their beliefs. But at the end of the day, we're all just kind of trying to figure out this gigantic thing in our own way, instead of coming together and just kind of taking religion for what it is.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was deserving.
Yeah, I think
Brian?
This is, like you said, Christian, it's classic people judging something before they've seen it, and these people probably never watched it and just decided they weren't going to because they don't want to question things, which, you know, I'm not going to sit here and blame people for it, but I think from what I knew about it, it was less egregious than I thought it would be. As far as the most offensive things that I feel like people may have had qualms with, I think Jesus's family stuff and the bloodline thing is extremely contentious, given people who truly believe in this stuff, as well as the idea that, which I do not know why this is contentious, and I think it's kind of silly and one of the most egregious rewritings of things, but Jesus as a white man and that being contested. You know, they say he was black when you know, he definitely wasn't a white guy, right? We know he was of Jewish
like
descent.
Middle
he
Eastern.
was in the Middle East, definitionally. He would have been, you know, a person of color by any stretch of the
100%.
imagination, if the stories of where he came from are true. So I don't see why that should be contentious, but I feel like that's something that people who have been presented with a particular image of Jesus would maybe push back on. But yeah, all in all, like you said, Chris, it's a pro-faith movie, which I think is surprising and not what I would necessarily expect, given what his rest of his movies were really about.
Yeah, and to be clear, Jesus was probably not black either. He was definitely darker skinned than any of us, but he was an Arab man.
Right.
So that was
Definitely.
So I think it's funny that the movie puts it in that way. And that some people do, and that you would get offended on getting mad at him not being white Jesus. Jesus was not European, so he would not have looked like a European.
See, okay, so with that being said, you touched on it earlier about the Catholic Church, because, you know, to put it nicely, they were trying to open their doors to the biggest swath of people, but they did kind of usurp pagan holidays and throw their tapestry over them, as well as, you know, changing what Jesus maybe would have looked like. I'm sure that wasn't just the Catholic Church, but with European people, you want someone that they can quote unquote relate to. So there definitely is that.
Well, it was a mass branding operation. Is what it was. It was, you know, let's make something very Roman, and that's going to. Basically, it was a way to qualm the cultural clash of a bunch of people that were Jewish, that were also these new Christians, and that were also pagan Romans. And they were like, all right, we're going to make everybody happy. Like, we're going to have our big idols. We're going to have these big illustrious, you know, places, and we're going to take all your money. And we're going to make Jesus look like all of you. So, yeah.
Before we get off this movie...
That's just history, folks. That's, you know...
That's just facts, folks.
That's just
Don't
facts.
at me.
Hashtag facts.
Jay and Silent Bob picking up women outside the abortion clinic is just ridiculous and hilarious. That one gets me every time.
There's quite a few great hearty guffaws to be had in silly moments.
So when we're talking about silly moments, I laugh out loud literally every single time. The scene where they first get into the car and Jay and Silent Bob and Bethany are speeding down the road, and like Jay and Silent Bob are just rocking out, and she's like, "What gear are you in?" And then Jay turns around to her and he's like, "Gear." And then the next scene is just them with the engine overheated, and Jay's like I've ever driven before. That's one of the most slapsticky, ridiculous gags in the whole flick.
I like that boardroom meeting scene. I think that's pretty great, and I think the best element of that is Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's like back and forth, and Matt Damon trying to be dramatic.
Yeah,
and
it's
Ben
very
Affleck
well
just tearing
paced.
apart.
Definitely.
And when he goes to, he's like, but you didn't say God bless you when I sneeze. That kills me.
And then he walks back in and he's like, wait, but what's the line when he comes back in? It's like this really cheesy line, and Ben Affleck, because he walks out of the room.
But I believe in this.
But I believe in this. And then Ben Affleck's just like, what a terrible.
He goes, I don't believe in voodoo, but I believe in this.
So bad.
I like their back and forth. Cool. So we'll kind of revisit this when we're comparing this between our next film, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back.
So starting production this Friday on Blunt Man and Chronic.
Does it say who's playing us in the movie?
I'm sure it'll be Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. You know, they put them in a bunch of movies.
Jay and Silent Bob are here.
Jay and Silent Bob movie?
There's a movie being made you two were the basis for.
What? And these two guys from Jersey are on a mission.
We gotta stop that stupid movie from getting made. Come on, Silent Bob. We're going to Hollywood.
If they can manage to get there.
How come we ain't getting no rides?
Because you're doing it all wrong. Hey, all the hitches do this. It's the first rule in the book.
Do you follow the book, too? I live my life by it. You live by the book? Well, you picked us up, didn't you? I gotta. All right. What are you doing? Whoa! We keep our eye on the prize.
That is from the trailer of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. You know, I do want to mention, and it's probably one of my favorite parts of this one, is George Carlin's performance in both of these films. He's a gem. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. R.I.P. I like his little bit in here and the bit in the last one. But we're talking Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. It stars Jason Mewes, Kevin Smith, Ben Affleck, Jeff Anderson, Brian O'Halloran, Shannon Elizabeth, everybody from all the movies that we have covered up to this point, in addition to Jon Stewart. Wes Craven's in here. You've got a cameo.
Gus Van Sant.
We get Mark Hamill in a wonderful part. James Vanderbeek, Jason Biggs. Just a whole mess of people that are friends of Kevin Smith. So we're going to talk about our first viewing and our current viewing as we do. Chris, you know it's coming to you.
I do. Upon first viewing, this is the first Kevin Smith movie I ever saw. And I was probably 14 when I saw this for the first time. 14 or 15 or something. Man, probably 14. Maybe even younger. I'm not sure. I'm dating myself right now. Anyway, this movie was hilarious to me when I was younger. Obviously, because it's full of dick and poop jokes, and it's just two goofy dudes taking a road trip cross country with a ton of hilarious comedian cameos, and it's a blast to watch when you're younger. Upon second viewing, this movie is a Looney Tunes cartoon come to life. Jay and Silent Bob are the zaniest characters in the View Askew universe. They are the most outside of reality in this universe that Kevin Smith has built. And while I have a lot of nostalgia for this movie, this is the movie that I find myself going back to least out of all the View Askew universe movies that he's made. And the reason being is this movie, it just really doesn't work unless you are a very big fan of what has come before it and what the universe that Kevin Smith has created. I was telling Brian before we started recording, this movie is literally View Askew Universe fan service. It's an hour and a half, 2 hours of View Askew Universe fan service. And if you are paying attention, the winks are really fun. The cameos are really fun. It's just like a 1.5 hour game of Where's Waldo with Kevin Smith Easter eggs. So, I mean, I can see why this movie may be panned, but it does hold a place somewhere in my heart because of what it meant to me when I was younger. But it is tough to watch as an adult.
That's putting it lightly. Brian!
So, this was one that I had seen in college as well, and I remember having enjoyed it, but it never stuck with me as something that was particularly great. I never came back to it after that, whereas with things like Clerks, I would show those to people later on after I seen them for the first time. I just like with the Marvel movies, having watched everything up to this point, I think I enjoyed it even more this time, although given its drawbacks, but just with how meta it is, it's, kind of a love letter to Hollywood in an interesting way. You just kind of see everything that Kevin Smith likes, and he's kind of riffing on the silliness of certain characters. We get the Scooby-Doo gang, we get a absurd Planet of the Apes,
right.
Imaginatory scene. I don't know what you'd call it. It's not a flashback, but
it's a daydream.
A dream sequence, right? Exactly. But at the end of the day, there are clit and labia jokes. It's like, this is what the movie's about, and I think it kind of highlights that Jason Mewes is not a particularly great actor. He can't really carry a full-length movie. I don't think it highlights some of his lesser acting performances that, when he's only popping up every so often, aren't as apparent, to me at least. But with that being said, the cameos and everything in this movie are what drives it along. I think it's fast-paced enough. It's not something where I was constantly checking my phone or anything like that. It had some good laughs. We get Will Ferrell. I don't think you mentioned him. Will Ferrell plays a totally silly role before he really became a movie star, if I remember correctly. Because this was like pre-Anchorman, right?
Yeah,
this came out in 2001. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Anchorman was just about to come out. I think Anchorman
was before
04, 05.
Okay. So that was kind of cool to see him, I guess, in the SNL era. He was probably still on the cast at that point. But the cameos, we get Mark Hamill, we get Carrie Fisher. He continues his love for Star Wars, obviously. But all in all, this is one of the weaker of the Kevin Smith movies for me, even on second viewing and being able to get all of the Easter eggs.
Brian, I'm proud of you. That was a super positive response to a movie that isn't very good.
Brian, can you read one of my notes? I don't have
Love Letter to Hollywood. Wow. Okay. On the same page.
Yeah. So I'm comparing this film directly to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, Christ.
That's rough.
It does show you the two brains at work when you do put them in the context of both their thoughts on Hollywood and kind of where they stand as creators. I think it's a good comparison. And obviously this movie's going for something very different. So I saw this movie in high school, and I liked it at the time. I didn't like it as much as Clerks 2. By the way, Chris, to make you feel better, Clerks 2, I'm excited for next week's episode because
I'm also very excited to talk about that.
Clerks 2, definitely one that I revisit a lot, and I don't hate myself as much for liking as much as this. I remember not loving this movie, but I'm proud of myself that even I was like, this is kind of just raunchy stupidness. So this viewing, definitely seeing it with crystal clear eyes, is a straight up bad movie. I do think that for positive elements that I'm pulling in, I think he got better at shooting things a lot. I think that's a constant theme. I think it's taken him a long ass time as a director, but the positive thing is that he is trying interesting stuff with the camera. He's got a little bit more money than Dogma, about twice as much for this film, and I think he's putting it to good work, and he knows how to make a low budget movie, and I think he knows how to allocate money effectively in how good it looks. And I think for everything to the editing to the color correction is good. So I think that he's definitely improved there. Like you said, Brian, this movie is really just about those fun little cameos that I think there are a ton of really great little funny gags with Ben Affleck in particular. Is it just me, or watching all these movies, he just transformed into just the most handsome dude in the world? Like, you look at him in Chasing Amy, and he's like the schlubbiest schmuck ever. And then by the time we get here, it's like, dude, that guy is a movie star. Like, yeah, it's really insane to see that come to life. And the wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's kind of like he's aware of what he's doing. He's constantly pulling up who would pay to see just a bunch of dick and fart jokes, and then they look at the camera. And there's a couple of moments like that where they're doing it. But you think if you're self-aware enough to know where the genre is, you could lift it up a bit. Where this movie, more than any movie I've seen in a long time, has the most homoerotic, terrible jokes throughout. It's just egregious. The amount of gay jokes that are in this movie is appalling, and it's kind of gross, and it's not particularly funny, and it just gets done to death. And I can forgive a lot of what he's done. I think this is his least tactful movie when it comes to its homoerotic friendship as it's going. I think it just does 10 too many blowjob and gay jokes and about guys having sex with each other, and really in not a way that, like, in Chasing Amy, there seemed to be such maturity with, like, people coming to terms with their sexuality. And in this movie, it is straight gay bashing. I don't think there's any celebration.
Kevin Smith actually was attacked by, I think it's the GLAAD organization when this movie came out. So that did not go unnoticed by the gay community, without a doubt.
Yeah, and it seems really really like it's taking a step back for Kevin Smith, kind of, even though he's a raunchy dude, kind of being able to acknowledge homosexuals as, like, a legit way people can express their identity and like who they can love. It
is a really sorry to cut you off again. He has a really weird perspective on it, especially considering that his brother is gay.
Yeah,
which is
I'm just
weird. Speaking
to the film standpoint. You have in Dogma things coming up about him, probably like when Chris Rock's character says, "Oh, and you masturbate more than anybody on planet Earth, and you do it to dudes." Right, and there's this, like, realization, and he's like, not all the time, and all this stuff, and he's kind of hiding it, and it seems like this movie completely forgets that in its own universe, that he's had this kind of revelation, as he's like, you have a really terrible, like, love relationship that develops, like, one of the worst I've ever seen on film, even for a silly movie. It's just kind of gross. Like, he's like, "What up, bitch? I'm gonna put it in your butt," and she's like, "You're so cute." Like, what is this? Like, and especially for a character that was very close to coming out of the closet in the previous movie. It's very strange. But I'll stop rambling, other than to say, yeah, you guys aren't wrong. And this movie's just straight bad. I think there are bad things about Kevin Smith films. This movie, to me, is just straight kind of bad on almost every front. But in saying that, comparing it to other Smith's films, where is he maybe not doing enough of what he's done successful, or what is he doing too much of?
I think to Brian's point earlier, like, he's absolutely right in saying that Jay and Silent Bob work best as supporting characters and not as leading characters. That's and what more can you say than that? The movie is based on those two characters. So, like I said at the very beginning of this segment, if you don't like the world that Smith has created thus far, and you aren't ready, if you're not in love, quote unquote, with this universe and characters, there's nothing really redeeming about this film.
I'd say, more than any of his movies. I don't know if I could even
pull, like, a positive message from it, like I can from Dogma. It's really just, like I said, a slapsticky, Looney Tunes-esque hour and a half.
I mean, it's literally a movie for, like, the people they're making fun of. Towards the end of the movie, they go up and beat up little kids that are talking shit about them on the internet. But it's like, to me, this movie is mainly for stoner 15-year-old boys. Like, that, is there any other audience?
I cannot disagree with that.
Is there any other audience for this movie? Like, it seems directly for that mindset, and it's really weird that Kevin Smith was able to cover what he did in Chasing Amy and Dogma to arguable success, but that he's covering those themes, and then he goes to this as, like, his straight comedy movie. It's a weird step in his career. And I know you would know more about his feelings on it. Does he have any regrets for this movie? Does he also not like it?
His opinion was he had caught so much flack for Dogma that when returning to the director's chair, he wanted to do something silly and lighthearted. And that kind of is what spawned this film. He literally wanted to make a film that he didn't think was going to offend anybody. Just, like, so slapsticky that who could take it seriously in any way, So that's kind of the origin of this.
Yeah. Brian.
Yeah, Chris, to what you said about it's a Looney Tunes movie, I feel like that's a good way to think about it, even as far as Jay and Silent Bob literally run into a wall that looks like a street, right?
Yeah,
it's a straight up, like, Roadrunner.
They're living cartoon characters.
So, yeah, that's it. And I think where this movie's at its best is in the meta elements where they're breaking the fourth wall. Affleck and Damon are literally like, and sometimes you just got to do it because your friend, what is it? I wrote it down. Sometimes you got to do the payback picture because your friend says you owe him, and they look at the camera. And something like that is just so funny to me.
I think that's one of the funniest scenes in the movie.
Oh,
I'm clearly
it's
biased
so
for
good.
Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, but Ben
you know why
Affleck's over the top, like, I don't know what we're gonna do. It's like Goodwill Hunting. It's hunting season.
Hunting season.
That's a great bit.
And Gus Van Sant is just counting
Yep.
money the entire time.
I'm busy, Ben. Later.
Yeah, that's a good guy. That's a solid guy.
Do you know why that line is in the picture?
No.
So without Kevin Smith, Goodwill Hunting wouldn't have happened. Like, he was a huge producer on that film. And then when Ben Affleck and Matt Damon received their Oscar, they neglected to thank Kevin during their Oscar speech. So, like,
Ooh.
this was kind of like their thank you for him.
That's petty, but yeah, they probably should have thanked him, right? It's like this man propped him up.
And don't like take it the wrong way. It's not Kevin Smith saying like you have to do this.
No,
it's
of course.
just them feeling terrible about it. You know?
No, and that's why it's nice. I know they had a falling out, him and Affleck at least, and now they're back on good terms, at least relatively good terms. So it's always nice friends getting back together, right? Something that was really strange to me, and it's like, we did Tarantino, and now we're on Kevin Smith, and it seems like, are we just going to talk about the Weinstein companies forever? But
God.
The fact that we have a character here who is just explicitly doing the casting couch thing was so weird. Looking back on that today, it's like, wow, so this really was something that it's the butt of jokes here, when everyone obviously knew that, I'm sure it wasn't just Weinstein doing this type of thing, right? But
oh, absolutely,
it's just so crazy how far the culture has come in awareness and sensitivity to those sorts of issues. And that was something that's like, wow, this really doesn't play well anymore. And I don't know how it played when it came out, but that was just something that was pretty interesting to me.
I would think that when it came out, and as disgusting as this is, it played matter-of-factly.
Okay.
Like, I don't think anybody would have looked at that and been like, well, that's not out of the norm, which is sick. But I'm glad that we are where we are now in 2019.
Yeah, this movie, I think, has aged the worst in every regard. Another fundamental thing that up until, I think, some of the music in Chasing Amy, and then what we'll see in Clerks 2, the music in his films is very poorly placed. And comparing it directly to Tarantino, who, like, so, perfectly places and puts his music in, this just seems like it was like, yeah, put that song on, it's fine. And there's constant bass slides, which really bothered me. I don't know why, but between every scene, it would be boom, boom.
Okay.
And I'm like, is this like a sitcom? Like, I just feel like
the answer is yes, Christian.
The music, yeah, but the music it just only distracted. Like, it never felt like the music was really elevating the goofiness. And I think there's a way that you can make a goofy movie. I mean, if we look back at like really silly movies that have aged well, you think of like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and there's a way that you do this that makes it a timeless, goofy classic, right? And go ahead, Brian.
Well, just to your point about Monty Python, I don't know if it was that one or Life of Brian. I think it is Holy Grail that does a similar intro scene where you have text on screen as like a disclaimer before the movie. I know one of the Monty Python movies did that, but we didn't talk about that in Dogma. But
no, we didn't.
They do that, and I feel like, yeah, Kevin Smith's got to be a fan of Monty Python, I imagine. Sorry, I didn't mean to mess your point up there.
No, that's okay. No, I think back to I like all of I like the Kevin Smith of stuff. We didn't talk about this on the. I'm gonna derail a little bit, but on the Chasing Amy, the funniest thing in Chasing Amy was on the DVD for Chasing Amy. There is a aside by Kevin Smith, and it's him discussing the commentary.
That's right.
He goes. So there's somewhat, there in the commentary there may be some shit talk about DVDs. Instead of the other format, Laserdisc, which is no longer, and it's a whole rant about how he's sorry that he shat on DVDs and promoted Laserdisc when that format failed. Yeah, that's, some of Kevin Smith's funniest stuff is just these like meta asides about him making the movies. And I think a very big point of why his podcast has been so successful. which is that he's got great brutal insight into his adventures as a director.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this. Brian, I don't know if this is on your copy of Dogma, but in my copy of Dogma, there is actually an older woman in the DVD menu telling to turn back, and you still have a chance to not watch the movie and not be condemned to hell. So,
oh wow,
just stuff like that, speaks to what you're bringing up.
Yeah, and I was really sad on this and on the next movie we're going to talk about is I got digital copies of this, and there's no special features. It's very back to beating the dead horse of these online videos need to come with special features. It's really disappointing.
Agreed.
Yeah. Guys, anything else on Dogma or Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back?
If you're going to watch one Kevin Smith film between these two, just watch Dogma.
Yeah, not a hard sell there. It's really funny to me, Chris, that you started with this movie and then grew to love Kevin Smith with how much of a inside joke this movie is. So I'm happy that you were able to enjoy it still, given not having seen anything.
Yeah.
No, if anything,
well, like I said, I was the demographic that this movie was pandering to at that point in time.
I would say that, I appreciate, it's definitely enhanced the experience seeing all the movies kind of in a row and seeing him pull those elements. But yeah, it does nothing to save Jay and Silent Bob in any way or make it work. At the end of the day, it's like, yeah, you can, if you're going through more than any of the movies we've covered, I think this is the one that you should actively not watch. Maybe look up a clip on whatever the top clip on YouTube is or something like that. Good Will Hunting scene, and maybe some of the Will Ferrell stuff. The Will Ferrell, the one really funny scene with him is when they're coming outside of the
diner.
The diner.
Yeah,
that's classic, great Will Ferrell. So.
Yeah. Before we finish, I have to mention just some of the cameos we get at the end of this movie. I love seeing Banky with Hooper at the end of this film, and Hooper talking about how they're like in a sexual relationship at least. So I feel like that's fun kind of closure for Banky as a character, considering in Chasing Amy, like we talked about, he seems to be a closeted character who's having problems coping with his sexuality. It's fun to see Alyssa Jones kind of banter with what's her face, the 15-year-old girl from Mallrats, and talking about how why did they choose to adapt this comic book instead of Holden's other comic book about Yer and his relationship, and then they jokingly say like that would never work as a movie, which Kevin Smith made, Chasing Amy. So there are, like I said, there are fun things in this film, and I find myself enjoying the things that are focused on other Kevin Smith characters, and not necessarily the stuff that's focused on Jay and Silent Bob.
And are we to believe that Dogma is actually a movie that came out in the View Askew-niverse?
Do they ever mention Dogma by name in the film?
Ben Affleck says that you made me be in that Dogma movie or something. Like I'm almost certain that they kind of break, because it's weird because Jay and Silent Bob are very important characters in that movie.
That is a weird break.
But I believe Ben Affleck says like you made me do Dogma.
Yeah, no, I do remember that line as well. Yeah.
That's weird because you see a Buddy Christ figurine in Carrie Fisher's car.
Right.
And I don't know if you guys watched to the very end of the credits, but Alanis Morissette comes back as God at the end of the credits and closes the View Askew-niverse book. That says the end, and she shuts
awesome.
the book. So technically speaking, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back would take place within the same universe that the events of Dogma took place. So that is also really weird that they reference Dogma as a film, because that definitely is like a weird error. But who gives a fuck at this point? Like, based on like everything we've seen in this film, like no one cares. No one cares.
Yeah,
I will say one. I don't know if you guys.
Even Kevin Smith, go ahead.
I don't know if you guys noticed this, but Jay, throughout the majority, if not the entire movie, is wearing a Berserker t-shirt. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Like the ridiculous Russian metal band from Clerks. So I thought that was a nice nod.
See, I'm telling you, man, the film's chocked full of fun Kevin Smith Easter eggs, but that is its only strength, and that is not enough to support a whole film.
Yeah, and I think this is the pinnacle of kind of my opinion with Dogma, which is like, I think he would have had a lot stronger outlets and been more creatively free if he would have just dropped Jay and Silent Bob. You know, and I feel like the whole View Askew universe, I know it has fun elements to it, and I still think he could have created other characters within this world, but the fact that it feels like he's so beholden to having to do that. It's
Yeah.
And kind of the reason we're doing this is the reboot, and I'm like, out of all the Kevin Smith stuff that I like, it's like I want him so badly to move on because I know I enjoy pretty much 100% his later films so much more that have nothing to do with this Skewniverse.
Yeah, and that's I don't know how much we should talk about that now, but that's a question I actually want to talk about in our next episode next week, which is like, what do we want? What do we hope for out of the Jay and Silent Bob reboot film? Considering that it's kind of a sequel to this movie as well as his other View Askewniverse movies. But if we've learned anything from this one, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not.
We'll
talk about it next week.
So next week, very exciting. We're going to be talking Clerks 2, and I think one of the most important Kevin Smith films to me growing up, more so than anything else we've talked about in my youth. So I'm really excited to get into that. We're going to have special guest James Barnes on that episode. It's going to be a lot of fun. Guys, thanks for doing it with me. Guys, thanks for being on the podcast with me.
Always.
Yeah, of course, man.
All right. We'll see you next week on
Pop-O-Holics.
Only fitting that we'd end with a homoerotic undertone joke.
Thanks for doing it with me.